Hi, I'm Dr. Sharon Celine, and this is,
Hi, I'm Dr. Brandy Walker.
and we are here today in honor of Black History Month to talk about all things ADHD related to girls and young women. And we're friends, we're colleagues, we've presented together at conferences, and we just wanted to have some time to talk about this very important topic in this very important month. So let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. So to echo what Sharon said, yeah, Sharon and I we're we're very cool, very close. And it's been a fantastic journey. And what I think is really phenomenal is that we get to converse about all of these different varying topics related to ADHD. Today's conversation is by far, overdue and highly important because we know that ADHD is really um, notorious for undermining people's success and for, just allowing you not to experience the quality of life that you otherwise would have. So we think it's important that we focus our conversation on people of color, particularly young African American or young African young ladies, so that parents are informed, as well as teenagers who may be experiencing symptoms and don't know, as well as young adults who are experiencing symptoms and aren't sure what it is that's undermining their success.
So let's define ADHD. So ADHD is a biologically based chronic condition that affects concentration, your ability to recall and apply information in a given time. It can affect your energy level. It can affect your emotional regulation, and it can affect your sense of yourself. People with ADHD struggle with organization, with planning and prioritizing. And there are 11 executive functioning skills that we all have. And many people with ADHD struggle with severe challenges in some of the executive functioning skills. In order to get a diagnosis of ADHD, if you're younger than 17, you have to show 6 out of 9 symptoms in 2 areas of functioning. And if you're over the age of 17, you have to show 5 out of 9 symptoms in 2 areas of functioning. A lot of people are diagnosing themselves based on TikTok videos. I have to put this out there, Brandy, because I'm not super supportive of people coming in and saying, I know I have ADHD because I watched this video. I think it's great if you think you might have ADHD to seek help, but stay open because it could be something else. It could be trauma. It could be anxiety. It could be depression. It could be a learning disability, could be twice exceptionality, which is being gifted in some areas and struggling in some others that are related to having anxiety or related to executive functioning deficits.
Just a little bit more about that executive functioning. So, I kind of like to think of it as a company, and there is an executive who's making sure all of the great decision making is happening, all of the management, And so, when you think about your brain, the part of your brain that's really responsible for ensuring that you stay organized, that you're able to make really good decisions, that you're able to take information in, organize that information, utilize that information to make good decisions. Your ability to start a task and stay on task and finish that task, your ability to multitask, to be able to kind of do one thing and then switch gears and do something else. Um, all of these areas are affected by the diagnosis because the brain is not fully developed functionally in that area. So, I mean, structurally, yeah, around 25, 26, everybody's brain is structurally solid and functionally ideally. But if you have ADHD or some other neurodiverse type of developmental disorder, then that means that part of the brain is not working as well or as fast as other parts of the brain. Now, what
And
does that?
and can be about 3 years behind in maturity. It just takes 3 years to sort of myelinate. So this is the part of the brain, our prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of our executive functioning skills. But if you did brain surgery, you wouldn't find organization or working memory in here. I agree that it's like an executive, but I kind of think of it as a team of executives, like each skill kind of works
Yes.
together. So it's like instead of having one conductor for an orchestra, there's like several conductors. There's a conductor for the wind section and the string section and the percussion section, and they're coming together to create that beautiful music that we hear as an audience member. It's a
That's a
great
great
analogy. Thank
illustration.
you.
It is, it is. It's a great illustration. So when we're talking about ADHD, we're saying that that may not be happening as well for people who have the diagnosis or people who have the symptoms and have not been diagnosed. Now, what does that look like real time? Well, now we're talking about maybe forgetfulness, forgetting meetings that you're supposed to be at, forgetting homework assignments, because working memory is compromised.
Mm.
Doing an assignment, but forgetting to turn it in, forgetting to pay bills, forgetting to make phone calls or, forgetting to be, um, well, not forgetting to be on time, but timeliness is also affected. Losing track of time.
That's me. Timeliness is affected. Just I always think I can do more in a given amount of time than is humanly possible. So like I have trouble estimating how long something is going to take, or I over kind of estimate my own capacity. Like, oh, that'll just take 20 minutes and then takes 2 hours. I'm like, wait, what happened?
Yes, yes,
And
exactly.
what we see so much is that girls show less severe symptoms of both inattention and hyperactive impulsive behaviors in school than boys. And so they're often not referred for ADHD. And so you'll have a girl who may have the internal aspects of ADHD, the distractibility, the mood instability, maybe feeling shy or trouble with friendships or a certain kind of perfectionism or daydreaming, feeling anxious maybe or sad. And many girls are referred for that anxiety or that sadness to see someone, but attention is never considered. And if you dig a little bit, that's actually part of what's going on. And particularly for girls of color, they're not there are many issues that happen where they're not referred. One is that there's often a projection onto them that they're older than they are, and two, that because they're not acting out like or calling attention to themselves in ways that boys who have ADHD typically do, they're fine.
Yeah, and that is a huge issue. What happens is that these young ladies who are, sitting in class but not really getting it, spend a lot of time at night trying to complete assignments, and there's like missing skills or missing information. So they're trying to figure it out. You have, and sometimes they don't understand that this is what it is, that it's an ADHD condition, but they just know it's taking a lot longer and that they're having trouble staying on task or focus in class. Like the distractibility is high. Um, sometimes,
Yeah.
and I just want to say sometimes that experience over time is very discouraging.
Mm.
Someone who gets really good grades but they have to work so hard, you can imagine how quality of life is compromised because you don't spend a lot of time doing the things that you enjoy after school hours. You're constantly hitting the books to make up for what you missed. Now, somebody else who doesn't get such high grades may just accept that, hey, I must not be good at school. And
Mm.
that person may decide to invest their attention into something else. Well, let me, start, maybe I'll spend more time on TikTok or more time on YouTube, or I'll spend more time, talking to guys or, or other girls, or, they can invest that time in something that's not going to deliver them the same type of results that they would need academically or in some type of extracurricular activity.
And
Um,
often, don't you see that with girls who are bright, what happens is that their intelligence compensates for their lower executive functioning skills, excuse me, and until the demand on those executive functioning skills is beyond the capacity of their, basic high intelligence, and then they can no longer suffer silently, and you start to see things fall apart. Either things fall apart at work for women who are trying to maintain jobs and have families, or things fall apart in school. I'm not able to turn my work in on time. And so we start to see this increased emotional dysregulation and a feeling and really an inability to perform at the level that they're accustomed to. And this is very confusing, particularly for smart girls with ADHD. I was going to say smart kids because it's true for boys too. But yes.
Yeah, and you make a great point, and I think that that is the point. Whereas when my intellectual capability no longer can like just get me over or get me through, or then I started taking it really personal, and I think that there's something wrong with me, and then my self-esteem, my self-worth, my confidence suffers, motivation is affected, and then I am not, now I have anxiety, or I'm feeling depressed. And so Sharon is notorious for this comment where she says ADHD always brings a friend. um, and we know that, ADHD definitely tends to also have, like secondary other conditions that kind of show up. And I think the secondary conditions kind of as a result of dealing with ADHD and, just the constant feeling like you don't have a lot of control over your emotions, or you feel like you don't really socially fit in, or you feel like, oh, I can't stay on task or whatever. So anxiety develops, depression, and as Sharon was talking about, the sense of self-worth is questioned.
How do you think that, for girls of color, when we think about intersectionality, that there's like this intersection for girls of color of their gender, of their race, of their religion, of their community, how do you think that affects their willingness and ability to go for an assessment, to get a diagnosis?
So I think a lot happens, for a young girl of color. One is the environment that she's in, right? So sometimes, even if she knows that something is off, she may have parents who absolutely do not believe for a second that there's something wrong. You know, I see it a lot where parents are like, "No, you're just being lazy. You don't want to do the work. Do the work, do the work." Or so you may be a young lady may grow up in a household like that where nobody's believing that you're having problems because they can't physically see something. Um,
Particularly if you've been succeeding for so long, right?
yes, yes. And then second, as you said, there are young ladies who grow up in households where it's a traumatic situation. They've been exposed to trauma, and the trauma could come from like sexual abuse, child abuse, neglect, but it also could come from like um, maybe there's a divorce in a household, or maybe the individual dealt with bullying,
Mhm.
or situations of safety. Not necessarily abuse, but just not in a very safe community or environment. So those things also are kind of in the background and providing context to, why maybe one of the reasons why ADHD could be a developmental concern in the first place. But
Mhm.
also there are also these pieces to the puzzle that we probably need to take more attention to look at. And then, as you mentioned, Sharon, when you talk about the other things like ethnicity, if that individual, that young lady is dealing with, not feeling culturally connected, not feeling like rooted, not feeling good about, your ethnic roots or background, not taking pride in that, not having this strong sense of self. There's multiple things happening, which makes sense that they all kind of become these intersections that are now affecting, you to get the help or the care that you need.
I think it's really interesting too because, I mean, before I said something about like don't get to give yourself a TikTok diagnosis, but sometimes there's information that's online that can lead you to wonder, is this something that might be going on for me? And that can be very helpful, but it's important that you take it to an experienced professional to talk about it. And one of the challenges in this country is the unequal access to care. Um, and that has to do with socioeconomic issues as well as ethnic issues.
I totally agree. In the community of color, there's not a lot of trust in the medical system. And one
Mm,
of the reasons why our trust is not there is because historically, people of color have been researched on against their own will. People of color have been subjected to surgical procedures, medical procedures, diagnoses that are not even like true or accurate. And then the care is not standard clinical care. Sometimes the care is compromised because of socioeconomic status, right? Not being able to afford really good insurance. And so now you're seeing by a generalist who doesn't really have the level of expertise that a person would need for their condition, or you're seeing by a provider who just does not care that your experience is different because you are a person of color.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's so, I mean, that kind of dismissal, it kind of, it gets into you in a deep level. And you start to hear that voice that, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're wrong about yourself. That's very dangerous for girls, regardless of ethnicity. But I think it's particularly dangerous for girls of color who have so many mixed and often negative messages that they receive about who they are and who they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think for a young lady of color, you really need like good mentors or like aunts or uncles who, of course, parents too, who build you up, teachers, like, people who are in so basically this team of community that's building you up because the messaging is so negative. The messaging on social media is pretty negative. There's a lot of stereotypes out there about what beautiful looks like. Um, even the Barbie movie, right? Barbie is associated with beauty, and for a long time, all of our Barbie dolls were white. They didn't even make Barbie dolls of color. And when they did make them a color, like we still had a preference for the others, but that's because of all of the messaging. So for a long
Mhm,
time, you know, just trying to exist and be who you are and accepted like that it has been a challenge for people of color anyway, particularly young Black ladies. But then
mhm,
if you add on to that, that now there's something wrong with how your brain is working, or
mm,
you assume that your brain is not working right, then that really does kind of mess with you at your core. And so some young ladies will just walk away from the school scene altogether and, give their attention to something else. And that something else tends to be something that's not like positive. Like I'll smoke cigarettes, I'll smoke weed so I can forget about these negative experiences. Hey, I'll just start hanging with these guys because they're showing me attention, they're showing me love, or I'll hang with these girls. The next thing you know, there's sexual promiscuity, there's these increased chances for sexual assault, sexual abuse, and then it's just the trajectory
Mm.
is really bad, but it happens really fast. And I'm
Right,
talking
and the risks, the data shows that girls with ADHD become sexually active earlier. And
yes.
and girls with ADHD have these ineffective coping tools. They use masking, which is kind of covering up how they're feeling. They might camouflage, so they're going to try to blend in. They may avoid things. They might try to be perfect, so they're really working on this impossible ideal of perfectionism of what a girl or a young woman or a woman even is supposed to be. We see eating disorders and high rates of isolation. So these are all things that are coping tools that actually aren't really addressing the fundamental issues underneath, which is I feel maybe some core sense of deficiency, or I don't like who I am, or I don't understand why I used to be able to do this and I can't do that anymore. That the thing that I was talking about earlier. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering if we can shift into really some ways, some interventions to help um, girls of color to find the assistance that they need and to pivot in how they're perceiving themselves. We know that a lot of kids who are online forget that they have a digital footprint, and that social media can, help with self-expression, and but it also has a kind of pressure about staying connected, and appearance comparison, and body ideals, and exposure possibly to bullying and other kinds of harmful content. So there has been some research which I want to just put out, which is that there was some research about TikTok videos that came out in 2023. And what it found is that 52% of those videos were misleading, 27% were about personal experience, and about 21% were helpful. But only 11% of those videos come from healthcare professionals. So this doesn't always have actionable steps or strategies, which is, I think, what I would like us to kind of pivot into now. What are some actionable steps and strategies that we can offer to people who are watching this? If you're a parent and you have a child who identifies as a girl or a young woman, or you're that young woman or that older, the more mature woman over the age of 21 yourself, um, what can we do to help you get the diagnosis that you need, get the interventions that work? What do you think about that, Randy?
Well, I like the idea of number one, kind of keeping it real with yourself
Mm,
and being able to take a step back and acknowledge if things are not coming together, that they're not coming together. And if you're seeing a pattern of like really not good decision making, the
mhm.
ability, like, if you're older, maybe it's with managing money, you're dealing with significant debt, switching jobs all the time, parking tickets, parking fines, like, all of these things that are like a pattern. Those could potentially be indicators that there's an issue with your executive functions. And if
Mhm.
you feel like there's an issue with your executive functions, then it is worth, seeing a provider or a doctor to further assess. So potentially get an assessment. Um,
So
if
kind of like trusting yourself in a way, like if you, and I think that for a lot of girls and women, we're taught not to trust ourselves. We're sort of socialized to believe what other people have to say. And, in this
Yeah.
instance, I would ask you to think about yourself, like, how consistently can I pay attention? What kinds of things interfere with my ability to pay attention? And how am I able to produce work or presentations or clean up my room? How am I able to perform tasks? Is it the way that I think I have the capability for, or is it way underneath that? Because those would be signs to that, maybe I should talk to someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said, Sharon, about how we spend a lot of time thinking about what other people say about us and allowing other people's standard to be our standard.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we do a lot of judging ourselves. And oh my gosh, social media is notorious for making us think, that we're not good enough. We look at people's reels on Instagram or whatever, and we are comparing ourselves to somebody else's, um, somebody's formulated story, something that they've like kind of, you know, spent so
Formulated, yes.
yes, crafting and all this other stuff. And it's like, it's not even true. It's not even a true story because it's been, doctored and manipulated. And so we really have to like be okay with who we are in the idea of like loving
Right.
yourself for
How do we
who,
get there? And I think the thing is that we want to get there in small steps, right?
yeah.
So we want to break things down. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling stressed, even maybe a little burned out, break things down into smaller steps. If the task list looks like this, uh, that is too many things on one list. There's 11 things on that list that I think I'm going to do this weekend, and that's just not going to happen, right? I'll probably do 3 of them if I'm lucky. And so, which are the top 3 things? And
Yes.
the determining factor is time, urgency. What is a deadline? I have to start with that. So we want to break things down. We also want to acknowledge if we live with imposter syndrome. Do I feel like I'm not who I present? Do I kind of fake it enough so people don't know the failure I am underneath? Those are signs that reflect not just social anxiety, but also a sense that I'm not okay underneath. And whether you have ADHD or not, that's something that really would benefit from counseling because no one needs to walk around that way. Um,
Absolutely.
and I think the other thing is that we want to identify strengths. You talked earlier about something, and which is so important, which is when we think about a growth mindset, there are really 3 aspects to it. One is identify your strengths, right? Those islands of competency and grow those. What do you like to do? What's one thing that you think you're good at or good enough at? I was listening to this podcast, Brandy, with this Dan Harris and Sharon Salzberg, who's this big, meditation teacher. And he does the 10% Happier podcast. And he was telling her that he's not trying to be good anymore. And she says, "What do you mean?" He's like, "I'm not doing good anymore because if you're not good, then you're bad." She said, "Well, what are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm aiming for good enough because if you're not good enough, then you're just not good enough, but you're still okay." And I was everybody needs to hear this, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is what you talked about, those adults, the people in the community who believe in you. We
Yeah,
call them in that growth mindset language, those are charismatic adults. So it's not necessarily like Taylor Swift or Beyonce or, some LeBron James or whoever. It's actually people in your life who believe in you, who you actually feel good around. Those are the people we want to like spend time with. And then the third aspect of a growth mindset is trying something, seeing what happens. If it works, cool, do more of it. If it doesn't work, that's okay too. Regroup, pivot, and try something else. And I think that for a lot of people who might struggle with ADHD and may not know they have it, This is the hardest part. It's like I have to get it right all the time, and you can't. Like there is no perfectionism, and the part of your brain that wants you to be perfect and tells you you need to be perfect is also not perfect.
Totally agree. Totally agree with everything you said. And I think, that it really would be people to do a little bit of research on their own to understand more about growth mindset versus fixed mindset and being willing to embrace, the beauty that they bring on any given Sunday and the qualities and the strengths that they have and expressing gratitude for all of the things that are going right versus focusing on the things that are not going right. And so I totally agree. I think another coping strategy would be honestly, kind of evaluating who's in your circle and whether or not they should be there. And if it's a bunch of positive people who uplift you and are trying to go where you're trying to go and you guys are trying to go like in the right direction, then fine. But if it's people who are negative or doing things that's not going to benefit them or that's not taking them places, then, it you might have to like switch them out for people who are mentors, teachers, positive colleagues. It's so important to have a village around you that will help you get to where you want to go. Rarely are we able to like really achieve all the things we want to achieve all by ourselves. So that's an important aspect of it too. Um,
I love that. That's so great. I think we want to kind of also leave people with some specific things. So if you're a parent, we want to make sure that you're accessing quality education and that academic supports are in place for your child. If you sense that something is persistently troubling your child, you've kept the lines of communication open and they're sharing with you that some stuff that you're thinking, I'm not sure about it, then talk with their primary care provider or a school counselor to get referrals for therapists. Don't wait around for things to get better. Really collaborate on getting some assistance. Also, work with your kids on listening to what they're saying. Let your child share their experience, allow them to tell their story without interrupting them, and use reflective statements like, I think I'm hearing you say X, instead of swooping in with unsolicited advice or minimizing or reassuring, because that's the fastest way to get your teens particularly to shut down. Um, Identify if you believe that your child is experiencing any kind of bullying, racism, homophobia, um, at school or in other areas of their life. Let's call that out and get assistance for that. And to help our kids really understand that we're part of their team. We're not the enemy. For adults, it's very similar. Who is your village? If you feel like, you're sad more days than not, or you're anxious more than you would like to be, talk to your primary care provider and don't give up if they tell you it's not that big a deal. Ask for a referral for a counselor. You deserve that, even if it's uncomfortable.
yeah. And just to add a couple more things to what Sharon had identified, for parents, when your child is displaying interest in a particular area, being okay with helping them further explore that interest and further build out their strengths in those categories. A lot of times, parents have expectations of their kids and they project those expectations on their kids. And you don't want to do that when you're dealing with someone who's neurodiverse. You want to meet them where they are and help them build up in those areas that are strengths. And then you can kind of, figure out how to strategize and implement coping strategies that help navigate some of the areas of challenge, but just being okay with, loving your child, accepting your child, And as Sharon said, listening to your child and partnering with your child for that collaboration. For teenagers, for parents of teens, basically the same thing. And at the same time, allowing them the autonomy to show you.
Mm.
Sometimes parents want to do it for their kids, or they want to do a whole ton of advocating, but our teenagers can advocate for themselves if they feel empowered. So if we're focusing more on empowering, listening again, and helping them tell us how we can best support them, and then support them in those ways, the accountability factor will probably increase more.
And isn't that true for adults also? So there may be people watching who are not parents, and what I would like to just encourage you is to build a network of friends, people who get you, people who accept you as you are. And you don't need 500 of them. You need basically three. One you can hang out with, one you can call when that first person is busy, and one you can call when the first two are busy. That's really all you need, right? And so we want to have you um, really hang out with people or pursue people who have similar interests and values to your own, rather than people who don't really get you, because then you're kind of living like you're in seventh grade again, trying to be part of the popular crowd. You don't need that. What you need is to feel like you matter. And so that's something that's so hard for a lot of neurodivergent folks, because it's difficult to reach out socially because there's a history of rejection or bullying, that and a fear of somehow making a mistake and then not being forgiven or something like that. It's also important to establish some healthy boundaries around what you do, what you choose not to do, who you follow online, who you don't follow. Um, it's okay to say no, and it's okay to say yes. So you figure out when you want to say no and to what, and what you want to say yes to. I like to think of the whole body yes. Like, when is your whole body like yes versus I'm not sure, maybe, that's a no, right? If you're not sure, maybe, that's a no. But if you're like yes, we want you to do that. And finally, please learn about ADHD. So many women have it who are not being diagnosed. In fact, adults who are getting diagnosed with ADHD are the fastest growing part of the population that's being diagnosed right now, because people are realizing that they have something that they never even considered before.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just as we were talking about earlier in honor of Black History Month,
Mhm.
now I think it's always important to celebrate Black History year round anyway.
Yeah, I don't know why you just get a month, like, really.
Yeah, I mean, and our history is so rich, and it's so full of success and creativity and power and influence, that I think it's so important that our young ladies of color be okay with learning about where you come from and who you are. Do not settle for a narrative that somebody feeds you and tells you, and it's
Mm,
not true. Um, we come from like kingdoms, and the intellectual capabilities that are phenomenal, and they are groundbreaking and have been foundational in the entire world civilization and development. So important to know where you come from, that you come from greatness, that you're from this fabric
mm,
of fantastic social worth and social capabilities and
mm,
intellectual capabilities, so that um, if you're dealing with ADHD does not define you. It doesn't create a person outside of who you are. You may have the diagnosis, but the diagnosis does not have you. And
mm.
so, you can embrace some of the strengths that ADHD has, like the ability to hyper focus and be able to see a lot of different things at a lot of time. Some of the most creative, phenomenally creative people have a diagnosis of ADHD, and their work is just breathtaking. And so you have to be okay with fully knowing who you are, your total worth, and not letting anybody take that from you or undermine you.
Well, I think we're going to stop on those beautiful words. Do more of what works. Own your successes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Dr. Brandy Walker, for coming to talk to me. I love hanging out with you and
Oh,
chatting. So great. Thank you.
yeah, Sharon is fabulous. I love her. So yes, yes. I hope we see you guys again on one of
Maybe.
our venues.
Yeah, we'll do this again sometime. Sure. It's
Yes,
fun. All
yes.
right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.